Picture this. You're sitting at a banquet in Rome, 39 CE. The room is filled with hundreds of the most powerful men in the empire. Senators, generals, men who command armies. You're sitting next to your wife, sipping wine from a silver cup, when suddenly the room goes quiet. Emperor Caligula stands up. He's 24 years old, draped in purple silk, and he's staring directly at your wife. He points at her and says two words that make your blood run cold. She comes with me. Before you can even process what's happening, guards are dragging her away. She's screaming your name. She's reaching for you. And you cannot move. You cannot protest. You cannot even frown. Because if you do, you'll be executed on the spot. She disappears behind a curtain. For 30 agonizing minutes, you sit there, listening to the moans, the screams, the mocking laughter. And when she finally comes back, the emperor stands up again and describes, in graphic detail, exactly what he just did to your wife, in front of everyone, in front of you. The other senators lower their eyes. They say nothing, because they know that next time, it could be their wife. This is not fiction. This happened dozens of times under the reign of Emperor Caligula, and the public violation of senators' wives was just one of his rituals. He wasn't just cruel. He wasn't just a tyrant. He was something far worse. He was a monster who turned absolute power into a ceremony of humiliation. He transformed the imperial palace into a theater of perversion and blood. He declared himself a living god and forced Rome to worship him. And he invented tortures so grotesque that even ancient historians refuse to describe the full details. Today, I'm going to reveal the 7 most perverted rituals of Emperor Caligula. These are practices that Rome tried desperately to forget. Secrets so dark that history books barely mention them. Because what Caligula did wasn't madness. It was calculated perversion. This is Crown and Dagger. And we don't do sanitized history here. We tell you the truth. The uncomfortable, disturbing, unfiltered truth. Because here's a question. Why do history books tell you all about the battles and the wars, but they never tell you about the perversions, about what really happened behind closed doors? Because the truth makes people uncomfortable, but power has always been more grotesque than what you were taught in school. So if you want the real story, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to go deep. Let's talk about power, real power. In 37 CE, Rome was the largest empire the world had ever seen. 60 million people lived under its control, and Caligula was its living god. He was 24 years old, and there were no checks on his authority, no limits. He had absolute power over the life and death of millions. He'd watched his predecessor, Tiberius, rule through fear from an island palace. He'd seen his uncle Claudius mocked for his stammer and his limp, and Caligula learned something critical. In Rome, humiliation was worse than death. Roman society was built on honor, on what they called dignitas. Your reputation, your family name, was worth more than your life. If you lost your honor, you were socially dead. And Caligula understood this better than anyone. He created a system where silence in the face of humiliation was the only option for survival. If you protested, you died. If you stayed silent, you lived in shame. There was no way out. Now, Caligula's most powerful weapon wasn't his army. It was the Roman honor system itself. According to the historian Suetonius, who had access to the imperial archives, Caligula organized what he called humiliation banquets, at least 40 times during his 4-year reign. That's one banquet every single month. and it's estimated that more than 200 senatorial families were destroyed by this system of sexual blackmail. This wasn't random cruelty. This was systematic. This was calculated. It was designed to break the entire ruling class of Rome. Every senator who witnessed these violations became an accomplice. If they didn't report what happened, they were complicit. If they did report it, they had to admit they watched and did nothing. Either way, they were trapped. Caligula turned Rome's most powerful men into prisoners of their own shame. So here's how the first ritual worked. The humiliation banquet system was simple, but absolutely brutal. Caligula would invite 50 to 70 senators to a feast. Attendance was mandatory. To decline the invitation meant treason, and treason meant death. During the dinner, Caligula would choose a wife. Any wife. He'd have her dragged to a private chamber while the guests listened to everything through a thin curtain. 30 minutes later, she'd return, and Caligula would describe in graphic detail what he'd just done to her, in front of her husband, in front of everyone. But here's where it gets even more twisted. Sometimes, Caligula would rate them. Out loud, he'd compare the senators' wives to each other, announcing which one was better, which one he enjoyed more. This was psychological warfare at its finest. He turned their wives into trophies to be scored, creating competition and ranking among the victims themselves. And we know this happened because the records have been preserved in the Vatican archives. There's a documented case of a woman named unearths. She was the wife of Senator Marcus Silenus. She was 26 years old with 2 young children and came from a noble family that had served Rome for 4 generations. One night in August of 39 CE, Caligula pointed at her. This was recorded in the memoirs of Seneca, who was actually present that night. He wrote that the emperor took her as one takes the spoils of war, and then described her body in terms that would make even a prostitute blush. Her husband, Marcus, sat frozen. His face betrayed nothing, but his hands beneath the table told a different story. His knuckles were white. He was gripping a knife so hard that witnesses thought he'd drive it through his own palm. Marcus Silenus never spoke in the Senate again. 3 months later, he committed suicide. The official records say it was natural causes, but Seneca wrote the truth. Marcus took his own life because the emperor had already taken his honor. But violating married women wasn't enough for Caligula. He wanted something even more perverse. He wanted the destruction of innocence itself, turned into entertainment. Which brings us to ritual number 2, the public auctions of virgin daughters from noble families. According to the historian Dio Cassius, who wrote in the 3rd century CE and had access to Senate records, Caligula organized at least 12 public auctions during his reign. Here's how it worked. Caligula would identify families that had offended him in some way. Sometimes the offense was real, like a senator voting against him or refusing to make donations to the imperial treasury. Other times, the offense was completely imagined. It didn't matter. He'd have their daughters brought to the palace under the pretense of imperial service. The girls were typically between 14 and 17 years old. Their families had no choice. Refusal was treason. Then, at evening gatherings attended by Rome's elite, wealthy merchants, foreign diplomats, and sometimes even the girls' own relatives, Caligula would auction them off. The starting bid was 1,000 denarii, which was roughly a soldier's entire annual salary. But here's the truly twisted part. The highest bidder wasn't buying the girl's freedom. They were buying the right to publicly take her virginity in front of the crowd while Caligula watched and laughed. We know about a specific case. A girl named Drusilla Minor, not to be confused with Caligula's sister, was 15 years old and the daughter of Senator Aelius Silenus. Administrative tablets discovered in the ruins of Pompeii and now housed in the Naples National Archaeological Museum document that her auction was held on March 18, 40 CE. She was purchased by a Syrian merchant for 3,400 denarii. She was returned to her family 3 days later. Her father never spoke her name again. She was sent to a remote family villa and vanished completely from the historical record. The shame was too great. Some families tried to save their daughters by quickly marrying them off, thinking this would make them unavailable for auction. Caligula's response? He simply annulled the marriages by imperial decree and took the girls anyway. But the arena provided Caligula with another stage for his perversions. This is ritual number 3. Forced gladiatorial combat. Caligula loved the spectacle of the arena, but according to Suetonius, he would force senators to fight as gladiators, not against professionals, but against each other, or against wild animals. The truly perverted part wasn't just the fights themselves. It was who he forced to watch. He made the senators' wives and daughters sit in the front row. Attendance was mandatory. They had to watch their husbands, their fathers, their brothers fight for survival, and sometimes fight to the death. And if any woman looked away, if she closed her eyes or showed any sign of distress, Caligula would have her dragged into the arena too. There's a documented case of a man named Quintus Pomponius who was forced to fight a starved leopard with nothing but a wooden club. His wife Julia was seated directly opposite him, 8 months pregnant. Quintus lasted 11 minutes before the leopard tore out his throat. Julia went into premature labor that same night. Both she and the child died. Caligula didn't attend either funeral. He seized their property the next day. When Caligula declared himself a god, and I mean literally, not metaphorically, he didn't just want worship. He wanted to corrupt the very concept of worship itself. This is ritual number 4, the temple prostitution system. He built a temple to himself on the Palatine hill, placed a golden statue of himself as Jupiter inside, and then ordered the wives of senators to serve as temple priestesses. According to Philo of Alexandria, who visited Rome in 40 CE, these priestesses were required to perform what were called sacred rituals with male worshippers. In other words, sex rituals in the temple to worship Caligula. Wealthy Romans who wanted favor with the emperor would make donations to the temple, and in exchange, they'd receive time with the priestesses. These were women who, just months before, had been among Rome's most respected matrons. The genius of this system was that it gave Caligula complete deniability. He wasn't forcing these women into prostitution. They were serving the divine emperor in his sacred temple. It was religious duty. Refusal meant a charge of sacrilege, which carried a death sentence. Ritual number 5 might be the most degrading of all. Caligula loved games, but his games were never about competition. They were about degradation. One of his favorites, documented by multiple sources, was called the crawling game. Here's how it worked. Caligula would host a lavish dinner with hundreds of guests. Halfway through the evening, he'd clap his hands. The doors would lock. Then he'd announce the game. All the senators had to get on their hands and knees and crawl to him like dogs. The last one to arrive would be executed on the spot. Picture this. Men in their 60s and 70s, war heroes, former consuls, grandfathers, scrambling across marble floors, climbing over each other, desperate not to be last. And Caligula would just sit there on his throne, laughing, eating grapes. There's a documented case from 38 CE involving a man named Lucius Vitellius, who had commanded legions in Germania. He tore his expensive toga trying to push past younger senators. His knees bled on the marble. His dignity was shattered in front of men who had once saluted him. When he finally reached the throne, gasping for breath, Caligula made him wait, made him kneel there, trembling, while the emperor finished his wine. Then Caligula pointed to his sandals. The winner, you see, got to lick the emperor's feet. That was the prize. And Lucius Vitellius, war hero of Rome, bent down and did it. The alternative was death, and he had grandchildren he wanted to see grow up. Sometimes Caligula would have the senators' wives compete instead. The prize in those cases was their husband's life. Crawl like an animal or watch your husband die. That was the choice. Ritual number 6 was perhaps the most psychologically devastating, and it was also the simplest. It was called the midnight summons. Caligula would send guards to a senator's home in the middle of the night. No explanation. Just, the emperor summons you. The senator would have minutes to dress and follow the guards to the palace. And then one of 3 things would happen. Scenario 1. Caligula would be waiting with a banquet spread out. The senator would be forced to eat and drink and laugh as if nothing was wrong. He'd have to toast to the emperor's health, smile, make conversation, while his heart pounded, wondering if this meal would be his last. Scenario 2. Caligula would be in a bedroom with the senator's wife. The senator would be made to watch, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, with guards standing behind him to make sure he didn't look away. Scenario 3, and this might be the most chilling. Caligula would just be sitting there in silence, staring at the senator for hours, and then he'd dismiss him with a smile and say, "You can go now." No explanation, no charges, no accusations, just a message. "I can summon you whenever I want. Your life belongs to me." According to Philo, one senator was summoned 7 times in a single month, each time for a different reason or for no reason at all. By the end of that month, the man had stopped sleeping entirely. He would sit by his door at night, fully dressed, waiting for the knock. And when it didn't come, he couldn't rest. When it did come, he wished he'd never been born. But the most perverted ritual of all wasn't a single act. It was ritual number 7, the system of complicity itself. Caligula made everyone complicit. If you witnessed a senator's wife being violated and said nothing, you were guilty. If you attended the auctions and didn't bid, you insulted the emperor. If you refused the temple prostitutes, you committed sacrilege. Every single ritual was designed to implicate you, to make you part of the corruption, to ensure that even if Caligula died, you couldn't speak out without exposing yourself. He turned Rome's entire elite into accomplices in their own degradation, and that, more than any single act of cruelty, was his masterpiece of perversion. For decades, historians thought these accounts had to be exaggerated. Roman propaganda designed to demonize a hated emperor, until 1987, when archaeologists excavating beneath the Palatine hill found something absolutely chilling. A hidden chamber with marble walls, and carved into the stone were 23 names of women. Next to each name was a date, and a phrase in Latin, sententia mors, which means silence is death. These were the wives of senators that Caligula had publicly violated. They had carved their own names into the stone in secret, wanting someone, someday, to remember what had happened to them. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Marco Bellini, said this discovery confirmed that the ancient sources weren't exaggerating at all. If anything, he said, they'd been too gentle. 2,000 years later, we found their names. Not because Rome wanted to remember, but because these women refused to be forgotten. Here's why this story matters. Absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it perverts. It turns suffering into entertainment. It turns humiliation into policy. It turns silence into survival. And most dangerously, it normalizes all of this until people forget it was ever different. The philosopher Seneca, who lived under Caligula, wrote this: "A tyrant doesn't need to kill everyone. He only needs everyone to fear being next." And he was right. But here's the most chilling part. This system of silence through shame didn't die with Rome. It's still alive today. In every institution where people stay quiet because exposure means social destruction. In every organization where shame protects the powerful. Caligula died 2,000 years ago, but his strategy is still working. He only ruled for 4 years, but in that time, he destroyed more than 200 families, humiliated the most powerful men in Rome, and turned the imperial palace into a theater of blood and perversion. He was assassinated in January of 41 CE, and all of Rome breathed a sigh of relief, but the damage was done. He'd proven something terrifying, that unlimited power can turn even the noblest men into silent accomplices of their own humiliation. This is the story that history books rarely tell, the real perversion behind absolute power. If you believe the truth of history should be told without censorship, hit that subscribe button. This is Crown and Dagger, and next time, we're covering another Roman emperor who used sex as a political weapon and did something even more twisted with his own mother. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear that story. And if you made it this far, drop a like. I'll see you in the next historical nightmare.